Hi, Social Studies 30-1. A quick little concept for you here. Uh, Before I even tell you what it is, I want you to study that table on the monitor right now. I'll give you a few seconds to look it over and see if you can figure out where I'm going with this. All right. 1993 federal election result in the Calgary Crowfoot riding or constituency. I had just moved to Calgary at that time. So we have a few candidates, um, but only one of these candidates is going to win the seat for the Crowfoot riding in the Canadian House of Commons. And it's going to be the guy that got uh, the greatest percentage of votes, which is Jack Ramsay. He got 65.9% of the votes in the Crowfoot riding. So, in looking at that, he got 65, practically 66. The second place finisher, Brian, only got 18%. So, in looking at these results, I could say democracy has probably been served. It looks like the people's choice was Jack Ramsay. He won with 66% of the vote. It makes sense to me that he should go to the House of Commons. He should win that seat in the Crowfoot riding, and he did. Now take a look at this result. Same election, 1993 federal election, in this case Edmonton East. Study that table and see what you can make of it. So if we were in class, I would ask you right now, who won the seat in the House of Commons for the Edmonton East riding? And you would say, well, Judy Bethel from the Liberal Party. She did with 32.9% of the vote. And I would say, who came second? And you would say, oh, it was Linda Robertson with 32.6% of the vote. Uh-oh. I'm not so sure in this case that democracy has been served. Mathematically speaking, I guess Judy Bethel won the seat. But when you look at it, really close second was Linda Robertson with only 0.3% of a difference in the votes. Not to mention, too, that if you add up all of the other people that didn't vote for Judy Bethel, there was more percentage of votes cast against her than in favor of Judy Bethel. So one could say, maybe democracy wasn't served in this riding in 1993. And that's what happens in our system, in the way we elect officials in Canada federally and provincially. Ours is called a first past the post system, or sometimes they call it a single member constituency. Single member constituency because only one person can go per constituency. In some systems, they take the top three or the top two, which in this case would have been Judy Bethel and Linda Robertson. But being that Canada is a single member constituency, only one person can go, and it's the person that finishes top, no matter how close the vote is. They sometimes call it a first past the post system, in that the post is kind of it's an imaginary line by which, one guy wins and no one else has more than him and he wins the seat. You don't really need to know that. Just understand that democracy was probably served here, but I would question it in the Edmonton East riding at that time. Um, Moreover, this is just one riding. What if this happened in several ridings across Canada? What if that happened a lot? Would you get a government that's been elected that is also reflective of what the people want? So if this was just a one-off, this happened just one time in one riding, we'd probably say, all right, well, so what? But what if this happened in 100 different ridings in Canada, or more? It would really skew the election results of an election, and we could really wonder, should that really be our government? Now take a look at this table and see if you can spot any anomalies, any things that just don't seem to make sense. I'll give you a few seconds to do it. Well, the first one that strikes me is 1984. The Conservative Party got 50% of the popular vote, but they won 75% of the seats. So an overwhelming majority government, but they only got half of the percent of the popular vote. Um, that one doesn't really make sense to me. I could say that maybe democracy in this case was not served. We could ponder that. Hmm, made sense in 1979. Liberal Party got 40% of the vote, so they got 40% of the seats. That seems to make sense. But in that same year, this doesn't make sense. 36-48 ratio, something skewed there. See if anything else leaps out at you. This one, 1980. Liberals win a majority government with only 44% of the popular vote. That one's a bit of an anomaly. 1984. Liberals actually got ripped off. Liberals got 28% of the popular vote, but only 14% of the seats in the House of Commons. You could argue they were ripped off. 1974, Liberals got 43% of the popular vote and 53% of the seats, so majority government with only 43% of the popular vote. That doesn't really make sense either. This is the downside, or what could be the downside of first past the post systems or uh, single member constituency systems. It doesn't always make sense. So what I'm going to talk about today is the way they do it in Sweden and other Western European countries. It's called proportional representation. So Swedish government, the nickname that goes with that is proportional representation. This is actually only going to take about 5 minutes. It's an easy thing to teach. Basically, the government of Sweden and most of Western Europe works much like Canada. Their parliamentary systems, in this case, the Swedish parliament is the Riksdag, and they pick their prime minister the same way that we do. The winning party picks the leader, and they're the prime minister. That's all pretty much the same. But what they do that is different from the way we do it, here's a typical Swedish election result, is that they use proportional representation to give out seats in their parliament. And so basically what this means is that if your party gets, say, 35% of the popular vote, you get 35% of the seats. And that's all there is to it. That's how proportional representation works. This is hard to do with the mouse. 35% of the seats because you got 35% of the popular vote. And that's all there is to it. The moderate party would have got 26% of the seats. Um, Liberal Party would have got 7.5% of the seats. That's proportional representation. There's nothing fancy about it. That's just how it works. But they do administer a cutoff. In Sweden, if your party gets less than 4% of the popular vote, you don't get any seats. So that's how that works. So not just anyone gets seats. There is a qualifying there. There's a basement level, and you've got to be above that level to get seats in their parliament. But that is proportional representation. I guess that doesn't matter. The good thing about it is that you get seats based on the accordance of popular vote, and that makes sense to a lot of people. With proportional representation, you wouldn't get the skewed results like we were looking at. I mean, and sometimes it works in Canada, but not always. Sometimes there are anomalies, and sometimes they're very big. And so using proportional representation, one could say it's more reflective of what the people have chosen, what the people have voted for. Using proportional representation, Judy Bethel would have got a seat. Linda Robertson would have got a seat. Harvey Ross would have got a seat. Kevin Kovacs would have got a seat. Jim Mewson and the 5 others probably would not have got seats. And so proportional representation would also mean multi-member constituencies, not just one person. Oddly enough, in not this past election, but the previous one, so Justin Trudeau's first electoral victory, he promised during that campaign that if the Liberals won, he would bring proportional representation to Canada. But upon looking at the election results, I think he only got about 40% of the popular vote. He realized that if we had used proportional representation, he would not have formed a majority government. So it was in the Liberals' best interest to not use proportional representation going forward. So they didn't. Um, Self-interest in mind. So I hope that makes a little more sense to you now. Um, the good thing is that it might be more reflective of what people want. One could say then that it's more democratic, but I'd like you to consider this. Look at these Swedish election results. Look at the bottom ones, the bottom feeders. The Sweden Democrats, the Pirate Party. All that means is the Pirate Party, they wanted to get rid of copyright laws for computer software. That's the Pirate Party. Anyway, make it legal to pirate software. Be thinking about why these groups got the results that they did. Maybe the fact that they're not indicative of the population means that they shouldn't get seats in the House of Commons or Parliament. I mean, even these guys, like, these are low numbers to only get 5% of the popular vote. Maybe there's a reason why most people didn't want them. Maybe they were a fringe, maybe they're a radical or extremist group. I'm not saying these ones in particular, but maybe just generally speaking. I want you to think back to the 1924 election in Germany, in which the Nazis got 2.6% of the popular vote in the German Riksdag, their parliament. In Germany, using proportional representation, that gave them a couple of seats in their parliament, in the Riksdag. And look what they turned those couple of seats into by 1933. They passed the Enabling Act, and Germany was no longer democratic. So all I'd like you to think about is that maybe there's a reason why no one voted for those groups in big numbers. And maybe the fact that they are a fringe group means that they shouldn't have political representation in an elected parliament. And the Nazis would be my example for that. I'm not trying to advocate one way or the other. I just want you to think about that. Maybe there's a reason for those low numbers. Maybe they shouldn't get a seat. And that's all. I'm just playing devil's advocate. Um, I think you probably understand this. It's not a hard concept, but it's an important one. They've been calling for this in Canada for years now. We'll see if we get it.